Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Take 5. Let's jump right in. So this week we've been recapping the message that I preached Sunday called New Year, No Manna. And our main text was Joshua chapter 5, verses 10 through 12. We were reading the story of that second generation of Israelites trying to go in and take possession of their promised land, of the land of Canaan, of their purpose, their God-given purpose. And back in our main text, we find the Israelites right there at the border of Canaan. And this is 40 years after the first generation, their grandparents and their parents, after that generation had been at the same spot getting ready to take possession of their purpose. And this generation of Israelites are at the same spot. They're getting prepared to take possession of that land. They're rallying the troops and they're making their battle strategies and they're gathering the supplies and they're sharpening their swords, so to speak. They have a new leader at the helm. His name is Joshua, but that's not going to change anything because this time they're going to make sure that they learn from their ancestors' mistakes. They learn from their parents and their grandparents' mistakes. They're going to make sure that they take possession of their land. And yesterday we talked about the first thing that this generation did differently than the first generation to ensure that they took possession of that land. And that thing was that they remembered. They remembered. Joshua chapter 5 verse 10 said that while the Israelites were camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, they celebrated Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the first month. So Israel stopped. They stopped their preparation. They stopped the sharpening of their swords. They stopped their strategizing. They stopped all of it for just a moment to remind themselves of all that God had done for them over the course of their nation's history. They stopped to worship, to celebrate Passover, and to ceremonially separate themselves unto God through circumcision. Now, I don't have a lot of time to kind of delve into what Passover was, but in a nutshell, Passover was their yearly scheduled time to ceremonially remember how God had freed them from slavery in Egypt. To contemporize it a little bit, it would be like having a revival once a year to get together and just celebrate all that God had done for you or in your church's history. And the Israelites were given very, very strict instructions on how they were to celebrate Passover by God Himself. Now, the interesting thing is, and even though some theologians agree, the Bible suggests that Israel did not celebrate Passover for the majority of their time in the wilderness, for those 40 years in the wilderness. But this generation of Israelites brought back the ceremony. They brought back this time of remembering to make sure that they didn't do what the first generation did. They didn't want to forget all of the things that God had done for them throughout the years. They wanted to make sure that this time, when they were sizing up their purpose, when they were getting ready to do what God had called them to do, that they didn't compare themselves to their purpose. Because we learned yesterday that every time we compare ourselves to our purpose, when we compare our abilities to what God has called us to do, when we compare our insufficiencies to what God wants us to do in life, every time we do that, we will always fall short. We will always be never enough. And that's what that first generation did. They compared themselves to the land. They compared themselves to God's purpose. And because of that, they realized that they were not good enough. They were not. They didn't have what it would take to take possession of the land, and they got complacent and decided to go back into the wilderness. But this generation of Israelites said, "We're going to stop everything we're doing to make sure that we remember all that God has done for us over the years. We want to remember how He freed us from Egypt. We want to remember how He sent those plagues on Egypt and to cause Pharaoh to change his mind about freeing us. We want to remember how He split the Red Sea so that we could cross over on dry ground. We're going to remember how He gave us water to drink out of a rock, how He fed us by giving us manna every single day in the wilderness. We want to remember those things because if we can remember that, we can remember that our God is sufficient enough to do all things. And if He's on our side, then surely we can do all that He has called us to do. Surely we can step into our purpose with confidence, knowing that if God is on our side, then we are enough. And so this generation of Israelites does something differently than the first generation. They stop to remember. And that's the first thing that's going to be the difference maker in making sure they fulfill their purpose, their potential, their God-given destiny when their parents and their grandparents didn't. Now, the truth is, pursuing God's purpose for our lives is all the time a very fearful endeavor. And if we're not careful, we will sit idle in life with recognized potential and refuse to move forward into the possession of our purpose. If we always view our potential for success through the lens of our ability, like that first generation of Israelites did, we will always certainly not be enough. But the great news is, our God is always enough. And if we can trust that God has purposed something in our lives, if we can trust that His plan is for us, that He wants us to be all that we can be and to fulfill His God-given destiny in our lives, then if we can trust that, then we can certainly accomplish everything He's called us to do. But we've just got to remember who is on our side. It is important to always remember all that God has done so that we understand all that He can do. So today, take some time, think over your life, think of all the great, powerful, miraculous things that God has done for you. You may not remember all of them. I don't expect you to, but take some time, maybe even get a notepad out and a pen, sit down with nothing going on, no TV, no music, nothing, and just think, meditate for a moment, and think of all the great, powerful, miraculous things that God has done in your life. Remember those things, because if you can remember those things, then surely you can trust Him enough to know that you can fulfill the things He's called you to do. Have a great day today. I love you.